Building a cloud-first organization is the goal of many companies. But despite the undeniable benefits of the cloud, putting cloud services to work effectively and economically is not a simple matter. Data must be sent to and from cloud services, which often must be connected to on-premises IT systems and hybrid cloud architectures. Specialized knowledge and skill are essential. Hi, I'm Stan Gibson, contributing editor at IDG, and I'll be your host and moderator for this webcast, 5 Principles of Successful Cloud-Enabled Transformation, brought to you by IDG and Sungard. Joining me is Ed Murphy, lead cloud specialist for the EMEA region at Sungard Availability Services. Welcome, Ed. Perhaps you could tell us just a little bit about your work at Sungard.
Hi, Stan. Thank you for the introduction, and it's very nice to be here today. So, yes, my name's Ed Murphy, and I'm the lead cloud specialist for the EMEA region at Sungard Availability Services. And today I'm going to be discussing the 5 principles of a successful cloud-enabled transformation. And these 5 principles are around change, skills, better, faster, and cheaper. And my role basically means that we work with our customers to ensure that we are considering these 5 principles throughout their cloud transformation.
Ed, of course, the cloud has changed IT infrastructure and the way business is done. But let's consider the broader context for a moment. How do you look at change?
Well, that's an interesting question, Stan. You know, to paraphrase a famous quote, the survival of the fittest is the age's law of business, but the fittest are rarely the strong. The fittest are those endowed with the qualifications for adaptation, the ability to accept the inevitable and conform to the unavoidable, to harmonize with existing and changing conditions. And we're going to be working through some of that today. So if we look at change and look at this in a little bit more detail, what's really, really important is that businesses have the ability to adapt to change. The ability of a business to evolve is a key differentiator in what stops it from going extinct. And the agents of change can take many, many forms. It can be change from external forces, such as pandemics, change from increasing customer demands for a better experience, financial change from CapEx to OpEx, or changes from mergers and acquisitions, changes from competitive forces, and changes from cyber threats, or even unplanned events, such as we all saw in the pandemic last year.
Ed, cloud-based services themselves have certainly changed. They started quietly, but they've gained momentum very relentlessly, I think. AWS comes to mind. What do you think?
Yes, most definitely, Stan. I mean, that is such a good example. If we take a look at AWS a little bit closer, in 1994 they were an online seller of printed books, unburdened by the need to have physical shops, so their operating costs were lower than traditional shops, and as such they did grow rapidly in the 90s. With the rise in availability of higher speed internet connections, Amazon also saw an opportunity to further reduce the overhead and started investing in e-books and e-reader, allowing them to distribute books electronically without the need for expensive distribution of physical assets. In 2007, they released their first Kindle, providing yet another revenue stream, shortly followed by a Kindle Direct publishing platform, which allows authors to self-publish books on Amazon. That online infrastructure allowed them to expand beyond selling books, and now, as we all know, includes the sales of music, groceries, clothing, furniture, and electronics, as well as becoming a marketplace for other e-tailers to sell their goods. Amazon launched its AWS platform in 2006 out of a need to be able to launch new applications and scale to meet the demands of customers without being burdened by the monolithic constraints of traditional IT. So it began renting out its tools and platforms to other organizations that wished to sell on Amazon.com, but rapidly expanded beyond that to become a services company that could rent its technology, applications, and tools to an array of organizations with a diverse range of use cases. Amazon were also the first to market with public cloud and now offer artificial intelligence, support for development of robotics, hosting of traditional servers, as well as over 200 fully featured services from a global scale network of data centers. So in that 27 years, they've evolved dramatically from being an online book retailer to one of the largest e-commerce and cloud providers in the world. They adapted to the changing use of technology and the ubiquitous nature of networks. They innovated to offer new customer experience, products, and services. Amazon adapted to the changing uses of technology and the ubiquitous nature of networks. They innovated to offer a new customer experience, products, and services, and as such have grown almost 200,000% and are now worth over $1.6 trillion. But ultimately, no business, no company or brand is too strong or too large to be completely protected from failure. And this is why we need to take a look at this around change, whether organizations can adapt, and if they can't, they will die. So we've covered off Amazon, but let's take a look at Nokia, who were the mobile phone market leaders. And despite having a very successful CEO with many, many years of industry experience, who took them to the top of their game, they failed to see the relevance and threat of Apple's iPhone. At the time, it was perceived as something of a gimmick that wouldn't catch on. And that failure to adapt ultimately saw the decline of what was the undisputed strongest mobile phone brand in the industry at that time. If we take a look at Kodak, they actually invented the digital camera and yet still didn't survive because they were too slow to try and alter their business model. They didn't innovate quick enough and continued to rely heavily on their traditional business model. And then again, we take a look at Netflix, who use cloud services to combine personal data with machine learning and analytics to individualize the customer experience with content recommendations, which helps keep their customers engaged with the service, thus driving ongoing revenue. So when we consider these scenarios, it really solidifies for me that the survival of the fittest is the age's law of business, but the fittest are rarely the strongest. The fittest are those endowed with the qualifications for adaptation, the ability to accept the inevitable and conform to the unavoidable whilst harmonizing with existing or changing conditions. And to effectively manage this change, essentially, you need a rule book to help control the outcomes.
And I think that might take us back to how we put the cloud to work for us. Cloud governance is an important practice, isn't it?
It's extremely important, Stan, and it's something we see time and time again, a lack of on cloud transformation journeys, which can lead to no end of problems. Cloud is a disruptor, and most IT organizations are starting to realize the business units they work for are the true driving force behind the innovation that customers are demanding. And cloud plays a major part in supporting that innovation. So it's vital that IT organizations have a coherent strategy which satisfies the business need for speed and agility, but also balances that with flexible governance frameworks to reduce risk and exposure. If you think about it, when you run a business, there are a set of rules that you have to comply with, be they privacy and data, security, finance and risk management, and so on. And cloud governance is the process of updating the rules for the new landscape in which your business will operate. So with traditional architectures, on-premise infrastructure, you know what your capital costs are and have a fairly good idea about the monthly operational costs. You also know what departments are typically running in terms of software, applications, and programs, as they're usually pre-approved for them. But in the cloud, different departments can develop their own systems and deploy assets with the click of a mouse. So whilst you no longer have to worry about capital costs, for example, and keep that cash in the bank for other projects where you want to add value, or even worry about unexpected capital costs, which can sometimes be damaging, again, if we look at last year's pandemic, your operational costs can be unmanageable without the correct controls in place. And this is where governance is really, really key. Furthermore, the software programs and applications deployed by one department may not even be able to communicate with those deployed by another department. So a number of things can go wrong here. Lack of controls create issues with costs and efficiency and security. So whilst the cloud services themselves are secure, any assets that are deployed with poor access controls or configuration vulnerabilities are an invitation to a hacker to infiltrate your network. So cloud governance is basically those sets of rules that prevents that. The rules of cloud governance should consist of things like budgets for how much departments can spend, guidelines about what software, programs and applications they can use, and policies for cloud security. Naturally, the rules can be and should be flexible, but there needs to be an approval process in place to prevent too much flexibility. Then compliance with those rules will also need to be monitored, and this can be achieved by many different types of cloud management software. Although in my opinion, if you operate in a multi-cloud or hybrid environment or plan to, I do think it's potentially better to use third-party cloud management solutions rather than the software supplied by the cloud providers themselves. And that's to give you total visibility of all your business's cloud activity. As you monitor compliance with the rules, you will probably notice areas that can be tweaked to improve cost efficiency or performance. And it may also be the case that as you expand your cloud-based operations, you need to make changes to the rules in order to accommodate those new products and services or to remain competitive within your industry. So you must have processes in place for this too. So just to kind of recap, cloud governance is a set of rules you create, monitor and amend as necessary to control costs, improve efficiency and eliminate security risks. There may be other areas of cloud operations that do require governance, but these will become apparent when you first start pulling together the components that will eventually form your rules of governance.
And let's turn our attention to the question of skills for a moment. The skills gap is a pressing topic in many areas of IT. How does the skills gap impact cloud adoption?
Well, Stan, you're absolutely right. And we're going to talk about a couple of different examples in this section and provide you with some industry stats around the skills gap. This is a huge challenge. And if we look at the skills gap challenge and some of the things that it's creating, it really is hurting some businesses, not just financially, but from a brand and reputation perspective as well. It's leading to failures in these migrations. So if we take a look at TSB Bank, they were bought by a Spanish bank, Sabadell, for $1.7 billion in March 2015. And they had a plan to integrate into their new owner's banking software. And in doing so, this project would save millions in IT costs. The time to develop the new system and migrate TSB over was just 18 months. And TSB was saying that their new owners had done this many, many times in Spain, which was true. However, smaller local Spanish banks did not have the sprawling legacy systems that TSB did. So they were blindsided by the size of the project. And by the end of the program, the system was not ready. TSB announced a delay and announced a risk that the bank might leave itself unable to offer mortgage quotes over a crucial weekend. As such, the cutover was pushed back again by a further 6 months to try and get the system working. And an expensive delay because TSB now had to continue paying their previous owners the use of the IT systems to stay operational. And that was estimated as a cost of around £70 million. So in April 2018, it was announced that the migration had completed successfully and now 5.4 million clients were on the new system. However, only hours later, when the system was switched over, the systems crumbled. And 1.9 million TSB clients who used the internet and mobile banking were locked out. Not just locked out of banking accounts, mortgage accounts, small businesses could not pay their staff, debit cards wouldn't work, and so on and so forth. So the TSB banking computer crisis of April 2018 is one of the worst in recent memory. And the CEO had to announce to the public that the bank was on its knees and also faces a huge compensation bill that will run into further tens of millions of pounds. An independent report blamed both TSB and the IT provider because TSB did not have that correct governance and controls in place to correctly assess the risk. They undertook the migration that was too large and complex in a timescale that was too aggressive, and more importantly, as we've just said, did not have the skills in place to deliver. And these are recurring themes in sales cloud adoption. According to recent research by Unisys, 1 in 3 cloud migrations fail due to companies not adopting cloud as a core part of their business strategy. So it's not just cloud adoption that's growing. Cloud migration failure rates are increasing too due to the lack of skill set. And while statistics vary, the estimates kind of range between 44 and 57% across various sources such as MarketWatch, Forbes, IDG, and Genesis. So there we've just covered off, a very expensive example of why the skills are so important. And according to a new report from Gartner, organizations that adopt the cloud often quickly realize that the skills required to succeed in cloud differ from those that had once worked well enough. And we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail. So, overcoming the skills challenge. A recent survey completed by 451 Research evidences the skills gap and how to overcome this. It's clear the skills shortage is specifically around areas that are not akin to traditional IT. And as such, cloud transformation does require a different approach. Some skills are indeed more transferable than others, such as networking skills. They do actually provide a great foundation. But a third-line engineer used to handling hardware issues will have more of a skills gap and will be less equipped to write infrastructure as code, for example, to automate within the environment. We have seen many get to cloud using infrastructure as a service, but then stood still, and they're unable to remain on the cloud continuum, which typically means you actually cannot yield the true benefits of cloud. So you need to consider what this means for your business from a risk profile perspective. When we looked at the earlier examples around change and where that constant evolution is really, really important, you have to have the skill sets to continue with that change once you get to cloud. It is an iterative process. And you have to think how you will use it to compete. So if we think about challenger banks that are now up and coming, they are releasing their code up to 4 times per day, which traditional IT approaches simply cannot cope with. So you can see there's a range of skill sets that are definitely lacking within the industry. And the rest of the survey actually asks, how do you plan to remedy those cloud skills gaps? And I think this is a really, really interesting one, because if we consider that the skills gaps are causing the issues, and there is a skills gap within the market, and you have all these options about outsourcing or using managed services and so on and so forth, the actual proposed way that's ranking the highest, 67%, are planning to do it themselves. So it's an interesting dichotomy there, really, because actually trying to do it yourself will take you longer. Also, of those customers surveyed, what became apparent as well is that almost 80% of their IT staff either have none or very, very, very few cloud skills. So for me, I find that really, really interesting that actually a lot of businesses are considering it doing themselves to solve the problem.
Ed, it's been well documented that many people contract for cloud services only to find that costs are far greater than they had anticipated. How can cloud costs be contained?
So that's a really good question, Stan. And often this is because the skills are not akin to cloud-based services. And as we said, whilst they can be learned, it does take longer. And also, comparing managed service costs to in-house can also be tricky. Typically, most TCOs do not consider everything. So a lot of businesses look at this and they consider doing it themselves, as you said. And we need to look at what that DIY approach actually means around employing the skilled resources to deliver the business outcomes. And we're going to look at some figures here, which is just around the people costs, okay? So, we've not included tooling and other things like that you would need to invest in to run a cloud environment. We're just going to look at the people. And those people will need to do the discovery, design, build, and run the environment. And we've taken a median average salary from IT JobsWatch in March 2021 and actually looked at Azure salaries, those monthly salaries, and how many full-time employees that will allow them into a loaded monthly cost. And, the loaded monthly cost to run that environment in-house will be around £20,000 per month, okay? But as I said, this is just people. A cloud provider's managed service charge would need to be greater than £20,000 for this DIY cloud example adoption to deliver economic benefit. So let's look at this. Let's take an example of an environment with 100 virtual machines, 50 with 2 vCPU and gig of RAM, and 50 with 4 vCPU and 8 gig of RAM, all with 100 gig of storage. And we compare that across the hyperscalers as well as a private cloud provided by a managed service provider. And if you look at the costs here of the actual managed service, they're coming in at around about £7,000 per month. So that actually means the managed service element for this 100 server example is a third of the price of the DIY approach. So very often, if you're working with a partner, you can actually achieve those savings because the cost to run and, as we said, remain iterative in the process and remain on the cloud continuum is very, very challenging if you don't have those skill sets. So what you need to consider around these costs is, the market value of change. And these are three things that we're going to start looking at in a little bit more detail. So the three questions, everybody should be asking is, will it be cheaper so I can reduce my cost to deliver my goods sold, for example? And secondly, will it be faster so I can transact faster in order to get more clients? And thirdly, will it provide a better experience so perhaps I can displace my competitors to gain a larger market share? And being better, faster and cheaper matters a lot, so much so that if you don't have that, you probably can't succeed in a cloud transformation. And the business should never move to cloud just for cloud's sake. They should be doing it for the business value and the solutions that it offers. Now, out of better, faster, cheaper benefits available, better and faster are probably the least understood but most valuable. And of course, cheaper is certainly helpful, as that can also help fund an actual transition. Cloud solutions can offer capabilities customers need to improve innovation, velocity, and outcomes while allowing them to take advantage of tailored access and potentially at lower cost. But some companies have existing on-premise solutions, which you touched on at the start of this call, Stan, that are critical to their success and will continue to provide value. And for them, cloud adoption will likely be a more paced transition and occupy the hybrid model for many, many years to come. For example, they may choose to add cloud elements to augment their existing solutions. Then they may gradually migrate their capabilities as opposed to a rip and replace approach. There are many options to consider and decisions to make. The key is to make them based on improving innovation, performance, and business value. By adopting tactical, one-off, and short-sighted cloud solutions, many organizations have failed to realize that real financial benefit, the ecosystem that value cloud platforms provide, and innovation potential. Only strategic decisions involving cloud computing will actually enable organizations to become purposeful, resilient, and adaptable to those emerging agents of change. Key to realizing return of investment and the innovation possibilities of cloud technology requires alignment with organizations' unique business strategy. Effective business strategy for a cloud-enabled transformation typically has 5 characteristics: governance for realizing value, scalable digital resources, business agility and resilience, cost-effective design, and operational excellence. An organization can determine the shape of its transformation, its success in fast-changing competitive environments, and its ability to respond to emerging opportunities by establishing a cloud strategy that provides success measurement mechanisms and the attributes of an effective cloud partner.
And let's drill down just a little bit on lowering costs. How can we make the cloud simply more affordable?
Okay, so will moving your servers from on-premise to the cloud be cheaper? I guess is what we're looking at here, the first item on the market value of change. And, in short, no, if you lift and shift as is, you will see moderate to no savings if this is just done in isolation as a tactical arrangement. But it can be. It definitely can be cheaper if you change your consumption model, maybe around managed services or platform as a service or cloud native services, and ensure that you are right-sizing within your environment. So, for example, why use an email or web server when an email or web service may be available to do the same thing more cost-effectively and deliver the same, if not better outcomes in most cases. So, moving to a serverless computer model means you do not have servers sat idle wasting resources, which absolutely can save you money. And if we look at that in a little bit more detail, let's look at this example between infrastructure as a service, where you will have your servers, your virtual machines in an environment, in a cloud, and platform as a service, which is more dynamic. These data warehouses and reporting architectures provide the same outcomes, but the platform as a service solution is more cost effective. The infrastructure as a service solution is based on a single Azure virtual machine. If you're already running ETL, known as extract, transform, load processes, on-premise using SQL Server, the question becomes, how quickly do I want to realize the benefits of moving workloads to the cloud? And going down the platform as a service route does require higher upfront effort, skill set, in terms of re-architecting the solution and retraining the developers. But as a result, benefits will be realized in the long term. So by contrast, an infrastructure as a service lift and shift approach requires less upfront effort, but will cost more long term, as shown in the cost comparison there. There is also an added opportunity, cost incurred, when maintaining infrastructure, which results in increased time to market and increased barriers to entry, to name but a few. These are all costly things that happen within a business. So where feasible, I would always recommend a platform as a service solution first approach in order to realize the full benefits of cloud.
That makes sense. How about making things faster?
Okay, faster. So will moving to the cloud be faster? Again, back to the market value chain. Yes, typically it does tend to be. If you have a cloud culture, organizations can enable automation that enables you to transact faster. So, for example, you can develop apps faster with cloud-native tools and services, and time to market can be faster with cloud by rapidly adding and removing capacity faster and more cost-efficiently than you can with on-premise solutions. For example, during the pandemic, the cloud environment enabled home workers to gain access to company resources using cloud desktops much more rapidly than it would have done had it had to build and deploy laptops to those remote users themselves. So when we look at this being faster and looking at the automation, it is about those repeatable automation tasks that are important to make sure that they're mastered. Cloud migration enables IT organizations to scale and adapt at speed, accelerate the innovation, and improve the business agility, while streamlining operations to mitigate those unnecessary costs. It not only helps companies propel to uncertainty, but it can also lead to increased sustainable growth. However, as we've already alluded to, it does come with its own challenges. And cloud adoption means organizations migrating from provisioning and managing static infrastructure, such as private data centers, to dynamic infrastructure across public clouds. Dynamic infrastructure automation no longer requires IT teams to manually provision and manage servers, operating systems, database connections, storage, and other infrastructure elements every time they want to develop, test, or deploy a software application. Cloud infrastructure automation enables organizations to develop, deploy, and scale cloud applications at speed whilst controlling those costs and reducing risk. Cloud automation also helps automate the configuration of different firewalls and access points and networks so that any manual errors that may have resulted in insecure infrastructure are addressed. Organizations must incorporate these key cloud automation security capabilities into their IT workflow to make sure that they can work securely and faster. Things like authentication and authorization, endpoint security, network infrastructure, cloud storage and backup, as well as logging within those environments. And I think I'd call out just a couple of key areas. Infrastructure as code is really important when it comes to cloud, as it automates that whole provisioning of the IT infrastructure at a reduced cost. Using tools such as Puppet, Chef, Ansible, and Terraform to automatically provision individual elements or entire infrastructures within the cloud. Another key factor is DevOps. Use of automation tools in DevOps limits manual intervention in processes that facilitate feedback loops between the dev and ops teams so that iterative updates can be deployed faster into applications and production. Again, we mentioned earlier about the challenger banks now releasing new code into their production environment up to 4 times a day, which was absolutely unheard of. So that automation in DevOps encapsulates the entire DevOps pipeline, containing continuous integration, continuous deployment, and continuous testing.
Ed, that certainly makes sense when it comes to speed. How about making things better?
So, will moving to the cloud be better? Of all the questions, this is actually the hardest and most complex to answer. And I guess the first task is to consider better for who? Cloud can be the enabler that allows companies to provide a better customer experience. Take Netflix as the example we covered earlier, where they combined personal data with machine learning and analytics to individualize the customer experience with those content recommendations. That customer experience makes sure that their revenue continues to drive. High availability features of the cloud can enable a robust user experience through those content delivery networks with auto scaling and load balancing. Cloud can also enable better collaboration between internal users using productivity tools such as G Suite from Google or Microsoft 365. Between the business and the customer through services such as Facebook and chatbots as well. Finally, the democratization of innovation is enabled by making the latest tools and services available to developers via rental models such as transcoding services, data analytics, and function as a service, which can all make the cloud much better for either you or your customers.
Ed, there's no question that security is on everyone's mind. What should people be thinking about when it comes to cloud security and, if necessary, recovering data?
Indeed, Stan. Well, as you can see there from the statistics, on average, companies take about 197 days to identify a breach and then a further 69 days to contain a breach, according to a recent IBM survey. And that is where, cloud is very, very important when we think about the business's ability to respond to those threats, being able to adapt to that change in that environment. And ultimately, cloud provides short and long-term recovery points, as well as infinite, secure, and tiered storage. Cloud provides the ability to recover infected systems in an isolated environment to allow data extraction. For example, some ransomware encrypts documents, but a database file may be uninfected, allowing for a recent database copy to be extracted. And cloud also provides the ability to rapidly deploy emergency desktops to provide a level of business continuity, even when the endpoints cannot be trusted and might have a cyber threat. And again, this is really, really important because a lot of people architect for high availability, which is fine. And a lot of people replicate their data and have another copy of it. that's not necessarily going to make it recoverable, because if your primary environment has become infected and you're only replicating, then it's likely that your secondary set of data is also infected, and therefore cloud recovery is really, really powerful when it comes to mitigating some of those security risks.
And let's turn our attention to the question of taking a cloud-first approach to IT infrastructure. Now, although many people might want to do that, some might be holding back. What are the key considerations of cloud-native IT?
Okay, so let's examine a specific cloud-native approach, serverless computing. So with traditional servers, you are paying for the compute resources, whether you're utilizing them or not. So with serverless, you're only billed when an application is being executed, or actually even more specifically, when the code is being executed. So the management of the back end is taken care of by the cloud provider, and the customer can therefore focus on the applications themselves. This allows the integration of separate systems to deliver more value, such as gaining metrics from remote sensors, using the Internet of Things to inform inventory levels, and therefore optimizing your costs. Another example is how the banking industry is transforming their core banking applications into web, account, and transaction functions that communicate with a common database backend. And this has numerous benefits, such as allowing the application to be tailored to the customer's needs, being charged for the execution of the web account or banking transaction, instead of servers that are consuming spend when idle, as well as being able to be dynamic, scalable, and resilient. This enables transformed banks to provide a better user experience, develop and release features faster in a cost-efficient way. And these are the things that you need to consider about. Back to the earlier slide when we were talking about who is it going to be better for. And that's the sort of journey you have to map through and consider when you're looking at using some of the cloud-native functionality and ensure that it is aligned to your business strategy and the customer experience that you desire.
And I wonder if you could tell us how some organizations are putting cloud-native into practice.
Indeed. So a couple of customers who we've anonymized, obviously, for the purposes of this, we've worked with very recently around that cloud-native journey. And, you know, the whole change, skills, better, faster, cheaper, are very, very central and core to those conversations that we have with them. So, you know, in the first example, we have an energy company with hardware that was going end of life, and they didn't have the in-house skills to evolve into cloud. Well, we did know that they wanted to do things better, certainly. They wanted to adapt to rapidly scaling demands. They also wanted it to ensure a good customer experience, and as well as driving down those management costs. So in a nutshell, when they came to us for help, they were talking about infrastructure as a service, as we mentioned earlier, just rather a tactical approach. We need some help and we want to lift and shift and go to the cloud. But when we started looking at those outcomes that they were trying to achieve, we pretty quickly identified that actually they were going to yield some great benefits if they went to platform as a service. And actually, by deploying a platform as a service solution using cloud-native functionality, where we wrote that infrastructure as code building the automation, the solution they were originally looking at was 54% more expensive than the one that we came up with for them by using that cloud-native functionality. And in terms of it being better, it certainly was. This particular organisation sent out weather alerts in extreme conditions and power outages and so on and so forth. And within 2 weeks of deploying the solution, they had 250,000 hits to the website in under 13 minutes, and the infrastructure never even fluctuated at all. All that automation scale was built in, and they didn't even need to call us. And nor did we need to do anything in the background. So really, really good example of that cloud-native functionality there. We touched on security as well. We had a global distribution company that was hit by ransomware. Their online backup became encrypted, and they didn't have the skills to recover the business. As such, they were down completely for 2 weeks, unknowing whether they would ever become operational again. So they needed a more secure architecture, and they needed to rapidly recover the business operations and avoid those CapEx costs, because of course unexpected CapEx costs to purchase new kit. And again, working with the public cloud providers and AWS, we used a lot of that AWS deployment templates around automation and so on and so forth to actually build their environment and get them ready so that they were ready to migrate their applications into AWS in under a week. Again, you can only achieve that if you're going to use a severe amount of automation.
Ed, at this point, I wonder if you could tell us what Sungard brings to the table.
Sure, I would be absolutely delighted to. So Sungard offer next-generation cloud services. We've been in business a long time, so we're on, various iterations of our cloud offerings. But I guess for Sungard, we recognize that cloud is not just the destination. The journey does not stop. The workloads need to integrate and evolve, which is why we've actually got a broad portfolio to support our customers throughout that evolution and cloud adoption. And whether they be around change, skills, or achieving deeper, better, faster outcomes. But it's more than that. We understand the pace of change required, and that flexibility is key. We understand from the FlexEra State of the Cloud report, as we touched on earlier, that 78% of enterprises will continue to have a hybrid architecture for some time, for many, many years to come yet. And what we do is bring that agnostic approach across all these environments that you can see there, whether it's a private cloud, a public cloud, whether you still need co-location or something on client side. And we underpin all that with the appropriate network, security, the DevOps as a service, as I said, constantly evolving those environments out to serverless environments where we possibly can, but ensuring that customers can recover. It can be very, very tricky when you've got multiple environments and different monitoring and compliance tools and so on and so forth to have that governance across the entire estate. And that's some of the skill sets that we bring to the table, but completely agnostic, outcome-driven. We're not led by the technology. Back to the TSB example, if you do not understand your customer's business inside out, then you cannot add value. And what we bring is those 5 principles we've just discussed to all our cloud discussions.
Before we close, Ed, what are the key points members of our audience should remember?
Thanks, Dan. So I'll summarize, and it is indeed a short summary, but essentially maximizing the potential benefits of cloud requires change. That is so important. And the skills to allow your business to do things better, faster, and cheaper. Hopefully, we've demonstrated why change is needed and how important those skill sets are. If you do not have the skill sets, you will not have a successful cloud transformation, and you will fail to yield the benefits of better, faster, cheaper.
Thanks, Ed. That's great information. Well, that is all the time we have in this on-demand webcast. So thanks to Ed Murphy, the lead cloud specialist for the EMEA region at Sungard Availability Services, for explaining the 5 principles of cloud-enabled transformation. For additional information on this topic, please take a look at the resources area of your webcast player, where you'll find links and documents of interest. And thanks for joining us. For Sungard and IDG, I'm Stan Gibson.